Emma Walsh clutched her worn leather bag against her side as she hurried along the gleaming marble floor of Meridian Enterprises headquarters, her heels clicking out a nervous rhythm. She had been working here for just over 6 months, and still, each morning felt like stepping into an alien world. The soaring lobby with its glass walls, the endless stream of suits, the crisp air scented faintly of expensive cologne and polished wood. It all reminded her daily that she didn't truly belong. At 25, she was barely keeping her head above water. Her job as an administrative assistant covered just enough to pay rent on her tiny apartment and send a modest check each month to help her mother with medical bills. On top of that, she attended night classes 3 times a week, inching toward the business degree she desperately hoped would change everything. But hope had a cruel way of moving slower than rent, slower than illness, slower than a world that demanded more than she had to give. She reached the elevator bank and squeezed in with a dozen others, her small frame pressed between tailored jackets and designer handbags. Her navy blazer was thrifted, her shoes practical and scuffed, her hair pinned back hastily that morning. She kept her gaze on the gleaming doors and tried to ignore the quiet conversations around her, the effortless way these people seemed to belong in this tower of glass and ambition. The 29th floor opened with its usual quiet intimidation. Emma stepped into the muted hum of the executive level where her desk was tucked away in a corner, close enough to be summoned quickly, but far enough to remain invisible. She exhaled as she slipped into her chair, the thin cushion sagging under her weight. With a ritual born of habit, she opened her bag, searching for her most precious possession, a burgundy leather-bound diary, its edges softened from years of use. It had been her father's last gift before his passing 5 years earlier, and within its pages, Emma poured everything she couldn't say aloud, her fears, her dreams, her frustrations with his company, and sometimes, embarrassingly, her thoughts about its enigmatic CEO, Alexander Harrison. But this morning her fingers met empty fabric. She froze, rummaging more frantically through the bag. Keys, wallet, phone, a handful of receipts, no diary. Her chest tightened. "No, no, no," she whispered, turning the bag upside down on her desk. The items clattered out, but the diary was nowhere. Her pulse spiked, panic clawing up her throat. She had been writing in it yesterday during the staff meeting in the main conference room. Had she left it there? A wave of cold dread swept over her. That diary contained every unfiltered thought she'd had about this company. Notes on projects that seemed unethical. Observations about executives. Her candid impressions of Harrison himself. Thoughts she could never admit aloud. If anyone found it, if he found it, her career, already fragile, would shatter in an instant. Looking for something? A voice asked lightly. Emma flinched and spun around. Marcus Chun, the marketing director, leaned casually against the edge of her cubicle, a cup of coffee in hand. He was one of the few executives who ever bothered to smile at her. "My diary," she admitted before she could stop herself. "I can't find it anywhere. I must have left it here yesterday." Marcus's expression softened with concern. "That doesn't sound good. Want me to help you check around?" "I think I left in the conference room," she said, her voice low. "But I can't just go wandering in there." Marcus considered her for a moment. "Harrison's in his office right now. You might have a chance to slip in before the next meeting. Or," he handed her a stack of reports, "you can use these as an excuse." He requested them anyway. Emma hesitated, heart racing. The thought of stepping into that room while Harrison was nearby terrified her. He wasn't cruel, exactly, but his presence was overwhelming. At 42, he had built Meridian from a struggling startup to a corporate giant, and he carried himself like a man who knew it. Tall, with dark hair just beginning to silver, piercing blue eyes that seemed to see through pretense, and a reputation for brilliance coupled with zero tolerance for incompetence. "You're sure he won't mind me dropping these off?" she asked nervously. Marcus gave her a reassuring smile. "He'll barely notice. Just be quick." Emma took the reports, her hands trembling, and made her way toward the conference room. The door was slightly ajar. She could see Harrison's silhouette by the window, his back turned as he spoke quietly into his phone. She knocked softly. "Mr. Harrison, I have those reports you asked for." He turned. eyes flicking toward her with that unsettling intensity. "Leave them on the table," he said, dismissing her with a glance before returning to his call. Emma set the reports down and scanned the room quickly. Her breath caught when she spotted a glimpse of burgundy leather peeking out from beneath a folder on the conference table. Her diary. Relief flooded her, but fear quickly followed. Had he opened it? If he had. Her hand twitched toward it, but before she could act, Harrison's voice cut through the silence. "Something else, Miss Walsh?" She froze, caught in the act of reaching. "And no, sir," she stammered, pulling her hand back quickly. "Thank you." His eyes lingered on her for a moment longer than necessary, as though weighing something unspoken. Then he turned back to the window. Emma fled the room, her heart pounding so loudly she thought it might echo through the hallway. Back at her desk, she collapsed into her chair. "He has it," she whispered to Marcus when he passed by. It was on his desk. Marcus frowned. Did he seem different? Like he might have read it? Emma shook her head, feeling sick. I couldn't tell. She leaned back, staring at the ceiling, a heavy knot tightening in her stomach. If he read the last entry, the one where she admitted noticing the loneliness in his eyes, the one where she confessed feelings she hadn't even admitted to herself until ink made them real, then everything was over. She wouldn't just lose her job. She'd lose the last shred of dignity she had. She barely slept that night, tossing in her cramped apartment as city lights flickered through the blinds. Each time she closed her eyes, she saw his face as he looked at her in that conference room, unreadable, as though he knew more than he let on. She woke before dawn, dressed in her most professional outfit, and rode the bus through gray streets. Her diary weighed like a stone in her bag, except it wasn't in her bag. It was still on his desk, and she had no idea what he had done with it. By the time she reached her desk, her nerves were raw. She tried to focus on emails, on scheduling, on the endless minutiae of her job, but every sound from his office made her flinch. Then, at precisely 8:30, her phone rang. "Miss Walsh," came Harrison's deep control voice. "My office. Now." Her heart stopped. She rose on unsteady legs and made her way down the hall. His office was enormous, all glass and steel, with a sweeping view of the city. He stood behind his desk, holding her diary in one hand. "I believe this belongs to you," he said quietly. Emma's breath caught. Relief and terror clashed inside her as she reached for it. But when she tried to take it, he didn't release it immediately. His eyes held hers, sharp and unreadable. "The last entry," he said, his voice lower now, almost intimate. "The last line." Emma's stomach dropped. He had read it. He had read everything. She wanted to deny it, to run, to vanish into the floor. But her feet stayed rooted as he finally let go of the diary. Her fingers closed around the leather, trembling. His composed facade cracked just enough for her to glimpse something startling. Vulnerability. "My office, 8 a.m. tomorrow," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We have much to discuss, Miss Walsh." Emma left in a daze, clutching the diary to her chest as though it were a lifeline. She had no idea whether she had just saved her job or destroyed it completely. But one thing was certain. Tomorrow would change everything. Emma barely slept that night. Her tiny apartment, usually a sanctuary from the sterile chill of Meridian's offices, felt like a cell. She paced the worn hardwood floors until dawn, clutching her diary as if it might dissolve in her hands. Every time she opened it, her eyes snagged on that final line she had written in a rush of unguarded emotion. "If only he knew that behind his empire of glass and steel, I could see the man he truly is, and that man is the one I'm falling in love with." She groaned aloud, pressing her palms to her face. How could she have been so reckless? The diary was supposed to be safe, private, the one place she could unload her rawest thoughts without consequence. And now the most powerful man in the company had read them. By 7:30, she was dressed in her charcoal skirt and white blouse, her most professional outfit, though its edges were fraying. She rehearsed explanations in the mirror. She could claim it was fiction. She could say she used writing as therapy, that none of it reflected reality. She could apologize profusely and beg for mercy. But deep down, she knew apologies wouldn't erase what he had read. She arrived at Meridian's headquarters 15 minutes early, the building still hushed in its morning quiet. Security guards gave her polite nods as she rode the elevator up, her heart hammering faster with each floor. When she reached the executive level, Harrison's door was closed, but a thin line of light shone beneath it. She forced herself to knock. "Come in," came his voice, steady and calm. Emma stepped inside and nearly faltered. Harrison wasn't behind his desk this time. He stood by the wide glass windows, coffee cup in hand, gazing at the city below. Morning light gilded the sharp lines of his suit, softening the edges of his stern profile. He turned slowly, his piercing eyes meeting hers. "Miss Walsh," he said, gesturing to the seating area in the corner. "Please sit." She perched on the edge of the leather armchair, her back straight, hands clasped so tightly they trembled. Harrison took the seat opposite, setting his coffee on the low table between them. "I imagine you didn't sleep well last night," he said, his voice unreadable. "No, sir," Emma admitted, seeing no point in pretending. "Neither did I." His words startled her. For a moment, she saw something unguarded in his expression, a flicker of humanity she had only ever guessed at. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "Your diary," he said carefully. "I want to apologize for reading it. I found it in the conference room. At first, I opened it looking for identification of its owner. But once I saw my name," he paused, his jaw tightening. "I should have closed it. I didn't. That was inexcusable." Emma blinked. In 6 months at Meridian, she had never heard Alexander Harrison apologize to anyone. "Thank you for that," she said softly, her voice catching. He studied her face, then continued. "What concerns me is not what you wrote about me, but the way you see things I've worked very hard to conceal. You notice details others overlook. About me, about this company." His eyes narrowed slightly. "How is it that in half a year as an assistant, you've observed what my board of directors hasn't in decades?" Emma swallowed hard, nerves warring with courage. "I pay attention, sir. It's part of my job to anticipate needs, to read between the lines. And maybe," she hesitated, then forced herself to continue, "maybe I look for the humanity in people, even when they try to hide it." A silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken thoughts. Harrison broke it by standing abruptly. He retrieved a folder from his desk and placed it on the table in front of her. "Read this." Emma opened the file with trembling hands. Inside were reports, graphs, and photographs. Words leapt out at her. Westridge Industries. Environmental violations. Labor exploitation. Fraud investigations. Her breath caught as she flipped through pages of damning evidence. "The board wants to finalize a merger with Westridge," Harrison explained, his voice hard. "They see billions in profit. I see a noose tightening around our reputation, but the board doesn't care. They don't want to listen to instincts or ethics." Emma looked up confused. "Why are you showing me this?" His gaze locked on hers. "Because your diary entry about Westridge raised the same concerns I've had for weeks. You notice the way their CEO avoided questions about factories, the discomfort in their CFO's answers. Intuitions that matched what my investigators later confirmed." Emma's mind reeled. "I didn't have proof," she whispered. "It was just a feeling." "Sometimes feelings are worth investigating," Harrison replied. He sat back down, his posture rigid but his voice lower. "Which brings me to another matter. Your personal reflections about me." Heat rushed to Emma's cheeks. She opened her mouth to apologize, but he cut her off with a raised hand. "I don't want your resignation," he said firmly. "What I want is to understand how you could possibly see past everything I built to protect myself." Emma's pulse thundered. She had always imagined him as impenetrable, untouchable. Now here he was, asking her to explain how she had glimpsed the loneliness in his eyes, the man beneath the armor. "Perhaps because I know something about building walls," she said quietly. "After my father died, I had to be strong for my mother, for my younger sister. I learned to compartmentalize, to hide fear behind responsibility. I recognize that pattern in others." Harrison studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Your father, you mentioned he sounded like he was a remarkable man." Emma's throat tightened. He He taught literature. He believed in the power of stories to reveal truths, even the ones people try to bury. And the diary, her voice faltered. It was his last gift to me. A silence settled over the room, softer this time. Then Harrison's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, his expression hardening. "The board," he muttered. "They're demanding a progress update on the Westridge merger." He stood. "I want you in that meeting." Emma jolted. "Me? But I'm not just an assistant," he interrupted, his tone sharp. "You notice what others ignored. Your insights are valuable. You'll attend as my advisor." "They'll never take me seriously," she protested. His eyes held hers with unexpected conviction. "They will when they hear you speak." Within the hour, Emma found herself seated beside Harrison at the long mahogany boardroom table, surrounded by 12 executives whose tailored suits and sharp gazes radiated skepticism. Gerald Thornton, the CFO, arched a silver eyebrow. "Is it necessary for your assistant to be here, Alexander? This is a sensitive discussion." "Ms. Walsh has provided valuable insights," Harrison replied smoothly, his tone brooking no argument. "Insights I believe the board should hear." Emma felt heat rise to her cheeks under the weight of their stares. She thought of her father's words scrawled in the front of her diary. "Courage isn't the absence of fear, Emma. It's choosing something more important than fear." When the conversation turned to Westridge, Harrison nodded to her. Heart pounding, Emma rose and opened the folder. "In reviewing Westridge's proposal, I noticed several discrepancies in their financial reporting," she began, her voice steadier than she expected. "Their revenue streams don't align with their stated operations. And during the last presentation, their executives avoided direct questions about their supply chain." She distributed copies of the report. These concerns warranted deeper investigation. Gerald scoffed. "These are serious allegations based on very little evidence." Emma met his gaze squarely. "Patterns are evidence." And further investigation confirmed those patterns. Harrison slid his confidential report across the table. Silence fell as board members scanned the damning pages. One by one, their expressions darkened. Even Victoria Reeves, the formidable head of legal, studied Emma with new interest. "Where did you study business, Ms. Walsh?" she asked. "I'm completing my degree at night school," Emma admitted, forcing herself not to shrink under the woman's piercing eyes. "But my observations come from working closely with this team and paying attention to details others overlooked." The discussion raged for 2 tense hours. By the end, the board had reluctantly agreed to delay the merger pending further investigation. As the meeting adjourned, Gerald lingered near Harrison, his voice low but sharp. "You're playing a dangerous game, Alexander. Elevating an assistant, undermining the board's priorities. It won't end well." Harrison's reply was equally cold. "Neither will selling our integrity for profit." That evening, as Emma gathered her things, Marcus approached her desk. "You were incredible in there," he said warmly. "But be careful. Gerald Thornton doesn't like being embarrassed. He'll come after you." Emma smiled faintly, though anxiety gnawed at her stomach. She was beginning to understand that losing her diary hadn't just exposed her heart. It had dragged her into the shadows of power where secrets festered and the stakes were far higher than she had ever imagined. And deep down, she sensed that the last line she had written, the confession Harrison had read, was only the beginning of a story that would test everything she thought she knew about herself, about him, and about the company that controlled both their fates. Emma's hand still trembled as she left the boardroom that evening, the weight of 12 pairs of eyes still heavy on her shoulders. She could barely believe what had happened. Alexander Harrison had not only defended her presence in front of the most powerful executives in the company, he had insisted that her insights mattered. It was surreal, intoxicating even. Yet beneath her exhilaration lay a coil of dread. Gerald Thornton's words echoed in her mind. It won't end well. She returned to her desk long after most of the floor had emptied, the hum of fluorescent lights and the muted rumble of elevators the only sounds in the cavernous space. Her diary sat safely in her bag now, but instead of comfort it felt like a bomb ticking against her side. One wrong word, one reckless line, and her world could still collapse. When she finally left the building, the city air wrapped around her like a cold hand. The night smelled faintly of rain and exhaust, and she pulled her thrifted blazer tighter as she hurried toward the bus stop. But even as she boarded the half-empty bus, she couldn't shake the image of Harrison's eyes meeting hers in that boardroom, unwavering, as though he saw her not as an assistant but as something more. At home, she opened the diary again, her pen hovering over the page. For the first time since she was a teenager, she hesitated to write. What if it fell into the wrong hands again? What if her words weren't a refuge but ammunition? But the compulsion to spill her thoughts was stronger than her fear. She wrote anyway. Tonight he trusted me. In front of everyone. I don't know why. Maybe he sees something in me I don't even see in myself. But Gerald was right. This isn't safe. The more I'm pulled into his world, the more I risk. And yet, I can't stop wanting to step closer. The next morning, Meridian's headquarters buzzed with energy. Rumors of the heated board meeting had already begun to circulate. Whispers of Harrison defying his directors, of an assistant speaking with unexpected authority. Emma kept her head down, though she could feel eyes following her as she walked to her desk. Marcus stopped by mid-morning, leaning casually on the partition. "You've caused a stir," he said with a faint grin. "Half the floor thinks you're Harrison's new protege. The other half thinks you're doomed." "I didn't ask for any of this," Emma muttered. "I know," Marcus said gently, "but power doesn't ask permission. It drags people in whether they're ready or not. Be careful, Emma. Gerald has sharp teeth." Her stomach tightened. She tried to focus on her tasks, but dread hung over her like a storm cloud. Around noon, Harrison's assistant appeared at her desk. "He wants to see you," the woman said briskly. Emma rose, smoothing her skirt with clammy hands, and made her way to his office. Harrison was pacing by the window, his tie loosened, his expression grim. "The board is restless," he said as soon as she entered. "Thornton especially. He doesn't appreciate being challenged." "I noticed," Emma said carefully. He turned. To her, his gaze sharp. "You were remarkable yesterday. Don't doubt that, but it paints a target on your back." Her throat tightened. "I didn't mean to cause trouble." "You spoke the truth," Harrison said firmly. "The trouble lies with those who don't want to hear it." For a moment, silence stretched between them, charged with something unspoken. Then his phone buzzed, breaking the moment. He glanced at the screen, his jaw tightening. "Thornton," he muttered. He silenced the call and looked back at her. "Be cautious. He'll look for any weakness to exploit." That evening, Gerald Thornton was not at home. He was in a quiet corner of an upscale bar, meeting with two men whose suits were expensive but whose expressions carried the cool detachment of sharks. One slid a folder across the table. "Our friends at Westridge are growing impatient," the man said. "They want the deal pushed through." Gerald opened the folder, his lips curling in distaste. "Harrison's grandstanding won't last. He's distracted. That little assistant of his, Walsh, has given him ideas. Dangerous ones." "Then discredit her," the man replied simply. "Find her weakness. Everyone has one." Gerald sipped his whiskey, his eyes narrowing. "Leave that to me." The next week at Meridian blurred into a storm of long hours and tense meetings. Emma found herself spending more time in Harrison's office, assisting with research, drafting reports, even sitting in on strategy sessions. The other executives looked at her with thinly veiled suspicion, but Harrison's conviction never wavered. He sought her opinion openly, valued her perspective in ways that left her both exhilarated and terrified. One evening, after most employees had gone home, she remained at her desk, poring over financial statements from Westridge. Her eyes burned from fatigue, but something in the numbers gnawed at her. Tiny discrepancies repeated across multiple accounts, too subtle to be coincidence. She circled figures, drew lines, her notes spreading across the page. "You see it too?" She startled at Harrison's voice. He stood in the doorway, his jacket slung over one arm. Yes," she stammered. "These numbers don't make sense." "It looks like fraud," Harrison finished grimly. "Exactly. But try convincing the board. To them, profit blinds everything else." Emma hesitated, then asked softly, "Why do you care so much? You could let them have their deal and still come out richer than ever." For the first time, his face softened, the steel in his eyes melting into something weary. Because I built this company from nothing. Because integrity used to mean something here. And because... He stopped himself, his gaze flicking to her. Because I've lost too much already by compromising. Her breath caught, but before she could respond, his phone buzzed again. He glanced at the screen, his jaw tightening. Go home, Miss Walsh. Get some rest. She gathered her things, but as she left, she couldn't shake the feeling that his fight with the board was more personal than he let on. That night, Gerald Thornton made his first move. Emma returned to her desk the following morning to find an anonymous envelope waiting. Inside was a grainy photograph of her at a coffee shop, sitting with Marcus. A note scrawled across the bottom read, Careful who you trust. Her blood ran cold. She looked around the office, but no one seemed to notice her panic. She slipped the photo into her bag, her hands shaking. Who would send this? Why? By afternoon, she had her answer. Thornton cornered her in the hallway, his smile oily. Ms. Walsh, he said smoothly, I hope you're enjoying your elevated position. Quite a leap for someone so new. Emma forced a polite smile. I just do the work I'm asked to do. Oh, I'm sure you do, he said, his tone edged with malice. But you be wise to remember that this is Meridian. Ambition can be dangerous. Her heart pounded as she excused herself, hurrying back to her desk. She opened her diary that evening, the words spilling in a torrent. They're watching me. Thornton knows. He's trying to scare me. I should walk away before I'm crushed. But something in me won't let go. Something in me wants to stand beside Harrison, even if it destroys me. That same night, Harrison sat alone in his penthouse office, staring at a photograph tucked in his desk drawer. A younger version of himself stood beside a woman with kind eyes, her hand resting on his shoulder. His late wife, the ghost of her smile haunted him still. He closed the drawer sharply, as though to bury the memory, but the weight of it lingered. Emma Walsh had seen through him in ways no one else had in years, and that both terrified and unsettled him. Across the city, Gerald Thornton placed a call to Westridge. Leave Harrison to me, he said coldly. By the time I'm finished, both he and his little assistant will be liabilities easily removed. And so the battle lines were drawn, though Emma had no idea yet how deeply she was entangled in a game that had been raging long before her diary fell into the wrong hands. Emma's days blurred into long hours filled with numbers, reports, and the quiet tension of being watched. The photograph Gerald had slipped her haunted her, its grainy shadows a constant reminder that she was a pawn in a dangerous game. She kept the envelope hidden in her bag, afraid to destroy it, yet terrified of being caught with it. Each morning, she wondered if that would be the day everything came crashing down. Yet her bond with Harrison deepened in ways she hadn't anticipated. He began relying on her not just for administrative tasks, but for counsel, asking her to read documents, to point out inconsistencies, to trust her instincts. She noticed the subtle way his shoulders eased when she entered his office, the moments when his carefully controlled voice softened around her. It unsettled her as much as it thrilled her. One late evening, she found herself in his office again, stacks of financial statements spread across the table between them. The city lights glittered through the glass walls, painting them both in shades of silver and shadow. Emma rubbed her temples, exhaustion tugging at her bones. You should go home, Harrison said quietly, watching her. And leave you buried in this alone, she asked before she could stop herself. His lips curved slightly, a ghost of a smile. You remind me too much of myself at your age. Stubborn, unwilling to stop until the problem is solved. Did it work out for you? She asked softly. He looked away, his jaw tightening. Depends how you define worked out. Their eyes met across the table, and for a heartbeat the air between them thickened with something unspoken. Emma's chest ached with the weight of it, but before either of them could speak, his phone buzzed. He frowned at the screen. Another anonymous tip, he muttered. Emma's pulse spiked. What kind of tip? Claims about disloyalty inside Meridian. Employees leaking. Information to Westridge. Convenient timing. His eyes flicked up to her, sharp and searching. Emma's stomach lurched. Did he suspect her? She forced herself to meet his gaze. Do you believe it? No, he said firmly after a pause. Not yet, but Thornton will use it to stir the board against me. Her relief was immediate, though fleeting. Thornton's shadow loomed larger each day, his oily smile flashing in corridors, his whispers infecting the air of the executive floor. Emma avoided him when she could, but he always seemed to appear at the worst moments. One afternoon, she stepped into the break room only to find him leaning casually against the counter, stirring sugar into his coffee. "Ms. Wall," she drawled. "Working late again, I hear. Quite the dedicated assistant. Or perhaps something more?" Her cheeks flushed. "I'm doing my job." "Oh, I don't doubt that," he said smoothly, his eyes glinting. "But people are beginning to talk. Harrison's sudden trust in you, your presence at board meetings. It doesn't look good." She stiffened. "Maybe it looks like he values the truth." Gerald chuckled, low and mocking. "Truth doesn't keep companies afloat. Power does. And power, my dear, is not on your side." He left her trembling with anger and fear. That night, she poured her frustration into her diary. "Thornton wants me gone. I can feel it, but I can't back down now. Not when Harrison is counting on me. Not when, despite everything, I can't bear to walk away from him." But even as she wrote, she knew the risks were mounting. Days later, she stumbled upon something she hadn't meant to find. She was searching old files in Meridian's archives, trying to trace Westridge's financial discrepancies further back, when she uncovered a series of internal memos. They were dated years earlier, during Meridian's early expansion, and bore Harrison's signature. The memos referenced deals with companies later exposed for corruption, directives to streamline reporting, instructions that skirted legality. Her blood chilled as she read. This wasn't the image of integrity Harrison had shown her. This was evidence that, once upon a time, he had compromised, just as he accused the board of doing now. Her hands shook as she tucked the documents back into the folder. What did this mean? Had he changed since then? Or was his crusade against Westridge just a performance, a way to bury his own past mistakes? That evening, she confronted him. She placed the folder on his desk, her voice tight. "I found these." He opened the memos, and for the first time since she had known him, Alexander Harrison looked truly shaken, his face drained of color, his hand tightening on the paper until it crumpled. "Where did you get these?" he demanded. "In the archives," she whispered. "Why didn't you tell me? Why pretend you've always been?" "Because I'm not perfect," he snapped, then closed his eyes, composing himself. When he spoke again, his voice was lower, rawer. "Those were mistakes. Choices I made when I was younger, when I believed survival justified everything. I regret them every day." Emma's throat ached. "And now, are you different?" His gaze met hers, burning. "I have to be, because if I'm not, then everything I built is worthless." Silence hung heavy between them. She believed him. She wanted to believe him. But the cracks unsettled her. She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. "Emma," she froze. "I don't expect you to forgive my past, but I need you to decide if you can still trust me, because without that, this fight is already lost." Her heart pounded. She left without answering, the weight of his words pressing down on her. Meanwhile, Gerald Thornton was making his next move. In a dimly lit office downtown, he handed a dossier to one of Westridge's representatives. "She's the key," he said coldly. "Walsh, Harrison's precious assistant. If we can discredit her, we weaken him." The representative flipped through photographs, notes, even copies of Emma's modest financial records. "She has debts," he observed. "Student loans, medical expenses for her mother, vulnerabilities." "Exploit them," Gerald said, his voice like ice. Back at her apartment, Emma stared out at the city lights, her diary open on her lap. She felt trapped between two worlds: Harrison's crusade for integrity, shadowed by his imperfect past, and Gerald's ruthless hunger for power. And in the quiet of her room, she admitted the truth she had tried to bury. She was falling deeper, not just into the battle for Meridian, but into her feelings for the man at its center. And she feared it would cost her everything. Emma woke to the sharp buzz of her phone, vibrating against the nightstand. Bleary-eyed, She squinted at the screen. A text from an unknown number. You don't belong at Meridian. Walk away before it's too late. Her stomach knotted. She sat up in bed, heart hammering, scanning her dim apartment as though the sender might be lurking in the shadows. Of course, no one was there, just her bookshelves, her mother's framed photograph, the cluttered desk where she'd been studying until midnight. But the message felt invasive, like someone had reached into her private life and left a fingerprint she couldn't erase. She deleted it, but the unease clung to her through her morning routine, through the rattling bus ride downtown, through the moment she stepped into Meridian's gleaming lobby. She felt eyes on her everywhere she went, whispers trailing like smoke. By the time she reached her desk, her nerves were frayed raw. Rough night? Marcus asked gently as he set a cup of coffee on her desk. His warm smile was a small comfort. Emma managed a weak laugh. You have no idea. He tilted his head. Then maybe you should tell me. She wanted to confide in him, but fear clamped her mouth shut. If Thornton was behind the message, and she had little doubt he was, then anyone could be a pawn in his game. Even Marcus, kind as he seemed. She thanked him and buried herself in work instead. By mid-morning, Harrison called her into his office. He was seated behind his desk, but instead of his usual commanding posture, he looked tired, shadows under his eyes. He gestured for her to sit. I heard you were in the archives again, he said, his tone even. Emma stiffened. I was looking for financial discrepancies, nothing else. I know, he said, studying her. But Gerald is using it to question your loyalty. He claims you've been digging where you don't belong. Her throat tightened. That's not true. I know it isn't. His voice softened. But perception matters as much as truth in this building. And Thornton is skilled at shaping perception. He leaned forward, his gaze piercing. Emma, you need to decide how far you're willing to go. Once you're marked as a threat, they won't stop until you're neutralized. That's what it means to play in their arena. Emma swallowed hard. And what about you? You're marked too. A faint, humorless smile curved his lips. I've been marked for years. I know how to survive it. I don't want you destroyed because of me. The quiet sincerity in his voice stole her breath. For a moment, she forgot they were in an office, forgot the empire glass and steel around them. It was just two people fragile and exposed. Before she could respond, a knock at the door shattered the moment. Gerald entered without waiting for permission, his smile sharp as a blade. Alexander, I need a word about the Westridge negotiations. His gaze flicked to Emma, lingering a second too long. Perhaps in private? Harrison's jaw tightened. Whatever you have to say, you can say in front of Ms. Walsh. Gerald smiled and faltered, but his eyes glittered. Very well. The board has scheduled a vote to move forward with the merger. Tomorrow morning, I suggest you prepare your arguments. He glanced at Emma again. Both of you. When he left, the air felt heavier. Harrison exhaled slowly. He's accelerating. He wants to corner us before we can gather more evidence. Emma felt dread coil in her stomach. Tomorrow could decide everything. The merger, Harrison controlled the company, even her place at Meridian. That night, she poured her thoughts into her diary with trembling hands. I don't know if I can do this. Tomorrow might be the end. But if it is, I won't regret standing beside him. Not for a second. The next morning, the boardroom pulsed with tension. The long mahogany table gleamed under the harsh lights, and the air smelled faintly of leather and coffee. Harrison sat at the head, Emma at his side, her notes clutched tightly. Gerald lounged opposite, his expression smug. The debate was brutal. Gerald painted Westridge as the golden key to limitless growth, dismissing concerns as paranoia. Harrison countered with evidence Emma had helped uncover, pointing out inconsistencies, ethical risks, long-term dangers. Emma spoke when prompted, her voice clear, but each word felt like walking a tightrope over fire. Halfway through, Gerald made his move. He slid a document across the table. Perhaps before we continue, we should address a matter of integrity. Ms. Walsh, would you care to explain why you've been secretly accessing restricted files in the archives? Gasps rippled through the room. Emma's blood froze. Harrison's eyes narrowed. That's enough, Gerald. Is it? Gerald pressed smoothly. Or does the board deserve to know that your assistant has been prying into confidential company history without authorization? What exactly is she looking for? Dirt on you? Or perhaps leverage for herself? Emma's hand shook. She opened her mouth, but no words came. Harrison rose, his voice like steel. She was acting under my instructions. If you have an issue, it's with me, not her. Gerald's smile widened. How convenient. The rest of the meeting was chaos. Though Harrison managed to delay the vote, the damage was done. Whispers filled the boardroom as members exchanged uneasy glances. Emma could feel the suspicion clinging to her like smoke. Afterward, Harrison closed his office door and turned to her. His expression was fierce, protective. You did nothing wrong. Do you understand me? Her voice trembled. They don't believe that. I don't care what they believe, he said, stepping closer. I care about the truth. And the truth is, you've been more loyal than anyone in this building. The intensity in his eyes made her chest tighten. She wanted to look away, but couldn't. The air between them hummed with something raw, dangerous. For a heartbeat, she thought he might close the distance. But instead, he turned away, running a hand through his hair. Go home, Emma. Get some rest. Tomorrow will be worse. She left with her heart aching, torn between fear and longing. Meanwhile, Gerald sat in his office, dialing a secure number. She's more valuable than I thought, he said into the phone. Not because of what she knows, because of what she means to him. If we break her, we break him. And with those words, the trap began to tighten. Emma woke on Saturday to a pounding on her apartment door. She stumbled from bed, heart racing, and opened it to find her landlord holding a folded piece of paper. His expression was grim. Rent's overdue again, he said. I've given you enough leeway, Emma. One more late payment, and you're out. Her face burned with shame. She had sent what she could, but between her mother's treatments and her student loans, the money never stretched far enough. She took the notice with trembling hands, murmuring a thank you even as despair gnawed at her. When he left, she unfolded the paper. Tucked inside the notice was another slip, this one anonymous. This is what happens when you play in games too big for you. Step away from Harrison, or watch everything crumble. Her knees weakened. Someone had gone beyond the office now. They knew her life, her vulnerabilities. Gerald. It had to be. She buried herself and worked the rest of the weekend, trying to ignore the dread. On Monday morning, she arrived at Meridian with dark circles under her eyes, clutching her diary like a shield. As she reached her desk, Marcus intercepted her. Emma, he said gently, you look exhausted. What's going on? Nothing, she lied, forcing a smile. Just a rough weekend. But Marcus's eyes flickered with concern, as though he knew she was hiding something. Later that morning, Harrison summoned her. He was seated at his desk, but instead of the crisp confidence he usually projected, there was tension in his posture. He gestured for her to sit. Thornton has taken this too far, he said bluntly. I know he's targeting you outside the office. Emma's heart lurched. How? I have eyes everywhere, Harrison said grimly. It's how I've survived this long, but it doesn't make it easier to watch. Her voice wavered. He knows about my debts. My mother's hospital bills. He's using them against me. Harrison's jaw tightened. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he rose and moved to the window. Years ago, when I was clawing my way up, I made compromises. Gerald was always there. Westridge. Emma breathed, her voice barely above a whisper, the word tasting like ash on her tongue. In compliance. Victoria's eyes narrowed, sharp as glass. Which means the consultancy payments, the master bypass, and the theft of your diary all tie back to a pipeline that crosses both Meridian and Westridge. A father and a son laundering their collaboration under the cover of audits. Emma felt the room tilt. Everything snapped together. Gerald's smirk, Lennox's silence, the creeping pressure that had followed her since the first whisper. It wasn't just Gerald. It wasn't just a boardroom squabble. It was a web spun across two companies, and she had walked straight into the center. Harrison's voice broke through her thoughts, low and unyielding. They thought they could break me by breaking you. They thought using your words would fracture everything I've built. He stepped closer, his eyes on hers, the blue of them darkened by fury and something more fragile beneath. But tonight you stood in front of them, and you gave them nothing to weaponize. Do you understand how rare that kind of courage is? Her breath caught, a tremor running through her chest. I didn't feel brave, she admitted. Bravery never feels like in the moment, he said quietly. It feels like drowning. Only later do you realize you were swimming all along. She turned away, blinking back the heat stinging her eyes. But he didn't let the silence linger. Emma, this war isn't going to end tonight. Lennox and Gerald will pivot. They'll come harder, and they'll drag Westridge with them. You're in it now, whether you want to be or not. Her fingers curled around the strap of her bag. Then teach me how to fight in it. He inhaled sharply, as though she had said something he hadn't expected. Something dangerous and undeniable. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The hum of the building filled the void, the faint crackle of electricity in the walls, the muted footsteps of executives scattering like shadows. Later, alone in her apartment, Emma sat with her diary open on the table before her, though its pages were empty. The stolen volume was still out there somewhere, clutched in the hands of men who would twist her words into knives. She stared at the blank sheet and, for the first time since she was a girl, her pen hesitated. Could she trust these pages again? Could she pour her secrets into them when the world was poised to rip them open? Her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. It's not too late to walk away. Harrison can't protect you forever. She closed her eyes, pressing her fingers to the page. And still her pen moved. They think they know my weakness. But they've mistaken love for shame. They've mistaken truth for fragility. I won't run. I won't leave him to fight alone. The word steadied her, even as the fear coiled tighter. Across the city, in the penthouse office lit only by the glow of the skyline, Harrison stood alone before the window. In his hand was a photograph he hadn't touched in years, his late wife's smile frozen in a happier time. He traced the edge of the picture with his thumb, then set it back in a drawer with a finality that felt like closing a chapter. His reflection stared back at him in the glass. Older, harder, lonelier. But beneath the armor, for the first time in years, there was the faintest flicker of something else. He whispered her name into the quiet, and the city swallowed a whole. And somewhere in the silence, he knew Gerald and Lennox would not stop. Westridge would not stop. The war was only beginning, and at the heart of it stood Emma Walsh, the girl who had left behind her diary and, in doing so, had cracked open the walls around his carefully guarded world. Marcus's hand trembled as he held out the paper, the phantom claws folded into a fragile square. His voice was ragged, stripped of his usual easy charm. If I carried it past the doorway, past a pair of eyes, I'd know which loyalty snapped first. Turns out it was mine. Emma took the paper slowly, her chest aching. Why, Marcus? Why let yourself be pulled into their game? He shook his head. Because games are all this place knows. Gerald doesn't need me. Lennox doesn't need me. But they offer me a seat at the table, Emma, a chance to matter. His voice cracked, and then you walked in and mattered without asking. Her throat tightened. You still have a choice. This doesn't have to be the end for you. His laugh was bitter, but soft. You sound like Harrison. Before she could answer, Gerald's voice echoed down the corridor, cold and deliberate. Talking about me again, Marcus? Emma's blood ran cold. Gerald stepped into view, his hands clasped behind his back, his smile a sharpened blade. Behind him, two men in tailored suits blocked the hall, their presence too heavy for mere colleagues. Ms. Walsh, Gerald said smoothly, always in the middle of things you don't understand. You should have taken my advice weeks ago. Walk away. Emma squared her shoulders, pulse thundering. I won't. Of course you won't, Gerald said, his smile widening. Because Harrison has filled your head with noble illusions, integrity, loyalty, love. He leaned closer, his voice dropping. Do you think he'll still care when you're the reason Meridian burns? Emma's heart twisted, but she stood her ground. You're afraid of him. That's why you came after me. For the first time, Gerald's mask slipped, his eyes flashing with something darker. I'm not afraid. I'm inevitable. Harrison is a man clinging to ghosts, and you, his gaze flicked to Marcus, then back. You're just collateral. The hall fell silent. Then Harrison's voice cut through like a blade. Then you've underestimated me, Gerald. He emerged from the far end of the corridor, Victoria at his side, her expression lethal. Security followed like shadows. Harrison's eyes locked on Gerald, no softness, no hesitation. You thought you could use her against me. You thought wrong. Gerald's composure faltered, just for a breath. Then he straightened. You won't stop the merger. You won't stop Westridge. And when this is over, she'll be a memory with no more weight than your regrets. Victoria stepped forward, her tone cool as steel. We have your consultancy payments, your son's involvement, and a missing diary that ties every step to you and Lennox. It's over. Gerald's smile returned, faint, poisonous. Nothing is over. You can't erase rot without bringing the whole house down. He turned and walked away, his men flanking him, the echo of his footsteps a promise. Emma's knees weakened, but Harrison was at her side instantly, steadying her with a hand on her arm. His touch was firm, grounding, but his eyes burned with fury and something more fragile. You shouldn't have had to face him alone. I wasn't alone, she whispered, glancing at Marcus, who stood pale and shaken, his betrayal laid bare. Not anymore, Harrison said quietly, his gaze never leaving hers. I won't let them use you again. Not as leverage, not as a weapon, not as anything but the truth you've already shown me. The corridor hummed with silence, the weight of everything unsaid pressing between them. For the first time, Harrison didn't look away. His walls were cracked, and through them Emma saw not the CO, not the strategist, but the man who had read her last line and found himself in it. Emma, he said softly, her name a confession, a vow. This isn't just about Meridian anymore. It's about us. She swallowed hard, tears stinging her eyes. Then let's fight for both. And in that moment, surrounded by shadows and conspiracies, Emma knew the war was far from over. But she also knew that whatever came next, boardroom battles, betrayals, headlines twisting truth into lies, she wouldn't face it alone. The diary had been her weakness. Now it was her weapon. And with Harrison beside her, every line yet unwritten carried the weight of a future they refused to surrender. The days that followed the confrontation blurred into a haze of whispers and sharp edges. Every corridor Meridian seemed to carry eyes that lingered too long, ears that strained to catch fragments of gossip, hearts eager to believe the worst because it gave them power. Emma moved through it like a ghost that refused to vanish, her head high, her step steady, even when her chest trembled beneath her blouse. The headlines had multiplied, each one twisting a different part of the truth. Mystery woman advised the CEO. Whispers of improper influence delay merger. Scandal in the glass tower. Some included the blurry photo of her profile. Others spoke of anonymous sources who claimed to know what happened behind closed doors. Each word was a knife, but Emma refused to bleed where they could see. Harrison never addressed the articles publicly, though Emma could feel the storm boiling inside him. In the boardroom, he was steel, precise, commanding. In private, in the quiet spaces where only she existed, he was something else, tired, protective, a man who let silence say what words could not. One evening, she found him in his office long after the floor had emptied. The city lay dark beyond the glass, the lights drowned by fog rolling low over the river. He sat at his desk, his tie undone, his sleeves rolled to his elbows, staring at nothing. You should go home, he said without looking at her. So should you, she replied softly. He lifted his eyes, and the weight in them almost knocked the air from her lungs. Home isn't where I go anymore, he said. It's what I lost. Her chest ached. She stepped closer, heart pounding. Then maybe it's what you build again. For a moment, the walls cracked wider, his hand reaching as if to touch hers, then pulling back before it crossed the distance. The unspoken stretched between them like a thread too fragile to snap. Before either of them could say more, Victoria entered without knocking, a folder in her hand and urgency in her stride. We have a problem, she said flatly. Emma straightened. Harrison's expression hardened. The vulnerability gone in a blink. What kind of problem? Victoria set the folder on the desk. Inside were photographs, grainy surveillance stills, timestamps marked in red. A man in a cap, carrying a flat envelope. The cufflinks visible again, the same crest. Lennox's son, Victoria said. But that's not all. He met with Westridge executives last night. Off the books. No security detail. No logs. They're orchestrating something bigger than a merger. We think they're planning to bleed Meridian dry and absorb what's left under Westridge's umbrella. Emma's stomach dropped. And the diary? Victoria's eyes flicked to her. They still have it. They haven't used it yet, which means they're saving it for the moment when it does the most damage. Harrison stood, his voice sharp. Then we take it back before they can. Victoria arched a brow. That's not exactly how board politics works. It's how war works, Harrison replied coldly. And make no mistake, this is war. Emma felt the air shift around him, the steel in his spine, the fire in his gaze. She had seen him fight in the boardroom, but this was different. This was the man behind the empire, the man who had clawed his way from nothing and refused to bow. Later that night, Emma sat in the quiet of her corporate apartment. The diary's absence a hole she couldn't fill. She opened a new notebook, its pages crisp and unmarked, and began to write again. They think they can silence me by holding my words hostage. But words don't die in ink. They live in action, in choices, in the courage to keep speaking even when the world shouts you down. If they use my diary, let them, because the only thing it will reveal is a truth I already live. Her hand trembled, but the words steadied her. She closed the notebook and pressed it to her chest, feeling the thrum of her heartbeat beneath. Across the city, Gerald raised a glass of whiskey in Lennox's private suite. Tomorrow, he said, his smile sharp, we end Harrison, and the girl comes down with him. And in that moment, Emma felt a chill crawl across her skin, though she couldn't see them, as though the night itself carried their threat to her window. The boardroom was packed tighter than Emma had ever seen. Journalists weren't allowed inside, but the glass walls might as well have been cameras. Every person seated at the long table was an actor in a play written to be consumed by an audience waiting beyond. She sat near the end, Harrison at the head, his shoulders drawn tight as if bracing against an invisible storm. Gerald's smile gleamed like polished steel, Lennox's face unreadable, a mask crafted by generations of old power. Victoria opened the session with a clipped report about the ongoing investigation into Lennox's consultancy. The words were sharp, the evidence damning, but Gerald leaned back as if amused. He tapped his fingers on the wood, each click echoing like a countdown. When Victoria finished, he rose. Very thorough, he said, his voice smooth as oil. And yet, as we discuss integrity, perhaps we should examine the integrity of those whispering into our CEO's ear. Emma's stomach clenched. She knew what was coming even before he produced it. The Burgundy diary, her diary, its pages bent from use, its cover far too familiar. Her breath caught, Harrison's jaw locked like stone. Gerald held it up as though it were a prize. This was found in a restricted space, abandoned by a certain assistant elevated far above her station. Inside, ladies and gentlemen, are thoughts not just personal but deeply compromising. Reflections on company leadership and on our CEO himself. Romantic musings. Accusations of loneliness and weakness. Hardly the words of a trusted advisor. He opened the diary, flipping to a page Emma knew too well. Here, for example, he read, she writes, if only he knew that behind his empire, glass and steel, I can see the man he truly is, and that man is the one I'm falling in love with. Gasps rippled across the table. Emma's face burned. Shame rose in her throat like bile. But before Gerald could savor his victory, Harrison rose with sudden force. That's enough, he snapped, his voice a blade slicing the air. His hand slammed on the table, silencing the murmurs. His gaze locked on Gerald, icy and furious. You think you've uncovered a weakness? You think love is something to be twisted into scandal. He turned, his eyes sweeping the board, his voice resonant and unflinching. Yes, she wrote those words. And yes, they're true. Emma Walsh saw me when none of you bothered to look. She saw the man behind the title, behind the armor, behind the ghosts I've carried. And if that makes me weak, then I will wear that weakness as strength. The room fell into stunned silence. Emma's heart pounded, her breath shallow. She stared at him, unable to believe what she was hearing. Harrison had just shattered the wall he had spent years building, confessing in front of the very people who had been waiting to use his humanity as a weapon. Gerald sputtered, momentarily thrown. You admit. I admit nothing you can use against me. Harrison cut in, his voice cold. Because integrity isn't about what people whisper behind your back. It's about what you're willing to stand for in the light. He looked at Emma then, openly, without hesitation. And I stand with her. Emma's eyes blurred with tears, but she refused to look away. She met his gaze, and in that moment, the shame melted, replaced by something fierce and undeniable. Lennox shifted, clearing his throat. This is touching, he said dryly, but sentiment does not run companies. Shareholders will not tolerate scandal and distraction. Victoria's voice cut in, sharp as glass. Shareholders will not tolerate fraud either. We have evidence linking your consultancy to payments from Westridge, evidence you thought buried under compliance reports. Shall we show them those pages next? Lennox stiffened, but Gerald laughed, regaining his composure. You think the press will care more about numbers and scandal? You've miscalculated. By tomorrow morning, every headline will scream about Harrison's affair with his assistant. Then let them, Harrison said, his voice unwavering, because while they scream, we'll expose the rot you've buried. The world may gawk at gossip, but it never forgets corruption once it's proven, and you've handed us everything we need. Gerald's smile faltered. For the first time, Emma saw uncertainty flicker in his eyes. The meeting dissolved into chaos. Voices rising, chairs scraping, phones buzzing as board members scrambled to call their allies. Harrison stood tall, Victoria at his side, Emma beside them though her hands shook. She had thought the diary would be her undoing, but somehow it had become their rallying point, the place where Harrison drew his line in the sand. Later, when the boardroom emptied and the night pressed close again, Harrison found her in the quiet of his office. He closed the door and turned to her, his face still taut with the battle, but his eyes softened. You didn't deserve that, he said quietly. Having your words twisted like that. They weren't twisted, she whispered, her throat tight. They were true. For a moment, silence stretched between them, raw and fragile. Then he stepped closer, his hand brushing hers, tentative, as if afraid she might pull away. So were mine, he said softly. Her breath caught. The walls between them, built of steel and fear and duty, cracked wide open. And in that quiet, in the wreckage of secrets and schemes, Emma knew the war wasn't over. But she also knew they had crossed a line that could never be undone. The storm broke not with thunder, but with silence. Meridian's glass tower gleamed against the skyline as if nothing had changed, but inside, the ground shifted under every step. The headlines screamed scandal, but the board whispered fear. Gerald and Lennox moved like men cornered, lashing out in subtle ways. Threats buried in memos, allies bribed with promises of power, a war waged in shadows. Victoria's team worked through the nights, tracing payments, locking accounts, securing affidavits. Emma sat with them, her hand steady even when her heart wasn't, her new notebook filling with observations that were no longer just personal. They were pieces of puzzle, threads in the tapestry of truth. But Gerald wasn't finished. He struck one final blow. It came on a gray morning, when Emma entered the lobby and found the marble floor crowded with reporters. Cameras flashed, microphones thrust forward. Security tried to block the swarm, but voices cut through like knives. Emma, are you in relationship with the CEO? Did you manipulate him to rise in the company? Did you betray Meridian from the inside? The world spun. Hands grabbed, flashes blinded, questions pummeled. She tried to move forward, but the crush held her. For a heartbeat, she thought she would fall. Then a hand caught hers, firm and unyielding, pulling her through the crowd. Harrison, his presence parted the sea of chaos, his glare silencing voices that dared to push closer. He didn't let go until they reached the safety of the elevators, the doors closing on the shouting frenzy outside. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice low, rough with concern. Her breath shook. "They'll never stop." "No," he said grimly. "Not until Gerald and Lennox are finished." That night, Victoria called an emergency session. Not a board, but of federal investigators. The evidence was ready. Fraud, laundering, cross-company collusion. Emma watched as Lennox's immaculate mask cracked under questioning. Gerald's smirk fading as the weight of his crimes bore down. For years they had hidden behind power, but now the truth peeled it away, layer by layer. By dawn, warrants were signed. Gerald Thornton was escorted out of Meridian in handcuffs. Fury etched into every line of his face. Lennox resigned before the papers hit the press, his empire crumbling with him. Emma stood in the quiet of the executive floor, the sun spilling pale light through the glass, and let herself breathe. The war was over, or at least this battle was. But the cost lingered. Her name was still in the headlines, her words still dissected by strangers, her diary still a relic of her most vulnerable self. Harrison approached, his steps quiet, his tie loosened, his eyes softer than she had ever seen. "You changed everything," he said simply. She shook her head. "You did." "No." He stopped in front of her, close enough that the morning light haloed the silver in his hair. "I built walls. You tore them down. You reminded me that integrity isn't survival, it's choice. And love." His voice faltered, the word heavy, unpracticed. "Love isn't weakness. It's the only strength worth carrying." Her eyes burned. "Then carry it with me," she whispered. The silence that followed wasn't fragile this time. It was steady, certain. He reached for her hand, not as a CEO claiming an assistant, but as a man choosing a woman who had seen him when no one else dared. Their fingers twined, and in that simple touch was every vow they didn't need to speak. Outside, the city roared with gossip, with headlines, with stories spun from fragments. Inside, Emma and Harrison stood in the quiet, their truth unshakable. The diary that had once been her secret, her shame, had become the catalyst for everything. For the fall of corrupt men, for the survival of a company, for the breaking and remaking of two lives. She knew the road ahead would not be simple. There would always be whispers, always those who doubted, always the ghosts of what they had endured. But she also knew this. She was no longer alone. She closed her eyes, leaning into the warmth of his hand. For the first time in years, she felt safe enough to dream, and in the pages of her new notebook, she wrote a single line. The last words aren't an ending. They're the beginning of everything we refuse to lose.